Hello again, everybody. Time once again for Michael's record collection. I'm very honored to have with me drummer from the Winery Dogs and probably too many other bands to mention right now. Mike Portnoy is with me. Thank you for your time, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, man.
So, brand new album, Winery Dogs 3. Uh, you guys just keep doing it. You, Richie Kotz, and Billy Sheehan just keep putting out great music. I wanted to ask you a few questions about that. Obviously, some stuff about your past. I want to start out like I usually do by asking you. I know you just came out with 10 records that made a difference to you in your teenage years. What was your first favorite record? The first one that really spoke to you?
It's right here. It's right here on Reel to Reel.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, this was a huge one for me as a child. I mean, I came out of the gates as a Beatles fanatic. So obviously all the Beatles stuff like Sergeant Pepper. Well, we got the props here. So yeah, I mean, this was the first one. I mean, this Sergeant Pepper was released about 6 weeks after I was released. And obviously the Beatles stuff was huge for me, but I have to say the Who's Tommy was a big one for me, and that was like my first experience with a concept album, and I've been a sucker for concept albums ever since.
Was your introduction to music your parents' music collection? Is that how you sort of first gravitated
It,
towards it?
it was my dad. My dad was a huge music fan and rock fan, and literally from the day I was born, like I was saying, I was surrounded by the Beatles and the Stones and the Who, and then came Bowie and Zeppelin a little later, and yeah, but he introduced me to everything, and I was like the only 10-year-old kid with like a record collection of like 1,000 records. By the time I was like 10 years old, I was just a, a huge collector and rock fanatic. Just became obsessed with music at a very early age. It was all my dad. He was a disc jockey as well in the early 70s, so
Okay.
there was just constantly music going.
Yeah. Now, when you started to decide, I'd really like to play some of this stuff, why drums? Why not guitar or keyboards or saxophone or something else?
Well, I started on piano. I created a new instrument. I started on piano, uh, and I remember in third grade, I wrote my first song on piano. It was a song called "Oh Yeah," and the music teacher, my third grade music teacher, like was so blown away by it. Like we ended up doing like a showcase thing where he had me come up and play the song in front of the whole class and everything. And that was like my first claim to fame. But uh, I don't know, piano just wasn't rock and roll enough for me. It was too structured, it required too much discipline. And all my favorite bands, I was always just listening to the drums. And so I inevitably gravitated to the drums. It was just a lot more rock and roll, a lot more physical, just way more up my alley.
Walk me through the how this setup was for you. Did you have the drum set up in a garage or a basement? What was the house structure like for
Well,
this?
when I was really young, like I was talking about, like before I was 10 years old and stuff, it just had a little tiny Mickey Mouse drum kit in the house. I probably got it, when I was like 3 or whatever.
Mhm.
But one summer I went to visit my cousin down in Florida, and he had a real drum set in his garage. And the whole time we were visiting, he couldn't pull me off the kit. And that's when I guess my grandparents took note, because they were there with me on that trip. And so for my 11th birthday, my grandfather bought me my first real drum set. Not real by today's standards, but for a kid, it was like a blue Sparkle Royce kit, like a 3 or 4 piece kit, and it was my first real kit. And that was for my 11th birthday, and I just spent years just getting around on the kit. I kept it in my bedroom. I was playing along to, obviously I was into the Who and Zeppelin and stuff like that. But then around that age, I was really going through a heavy Kiss phase. So, this was around 77, 78. And so I was playing a lot of Kiss stuff on the kit. And, just that was how I kind of learned my way around the kit with that early stuff. And then later on, once I became a teenager, that's when the more progressive drummers and music kind of entered my life.
Yeah, I was enjoying that video of you talking about the records that you enjoyed as a teenager, and giving a shout out to guys like Peter Criss and Nico McBrain was that spoke to me because that's kind of what I was into as well. So, Um, we move a little bit ahead in the programming here in the life that is Mike Portnoy's, and we ask, at what point was there one point where you knew that you could make a living as a musician, or did you start making a living as a musician before you had that epiphany?
Uh, well, I stopped working a day job when Dream Theater signed our first record deal in 1988. And my day job wasn't really that significant. I was just like delivering Chinese food and, stuff like that. But it was once we signed our first record deal and started to just really focus on the band that I, kind of just stopped working a day job and did that. But it really wasn't until many, many years later where I actually was seeing any money. Luckily, I had a lot of support in those early days from family and stuff to allow me to be able to really focus on the band and the music and stuff. But I don't think I started to really make a living at this until Dream Theater's third album or so. By the time we were doing Awake, and I was in my, I guess, mid to late 20s at that point, and my wife and I got married. So it was around that point where we actually were starting to make a living off of it, and then luckily ever since then I have been. But times have changed. These days it's very, very hard for people to actually make any money off of either record sales or touring. It's really very, very difficult. Luckily, I've been doing this for 30 plus years and already have an established name that I luckily can do that. But man, if I was just starting off now in this day and age, I don't know how young musicians can make a living off of it financially. It's just so tough now.
Yeah, for sure. You have always been someone who stays busy. I think currently, do you actually know how many bands you've been in? Do you have that number somewhere?
I do have a list somewhere, and I think it's something crazy like 25 different bands or something like that. Currently, there's 9. I realized there's currently 9 bands that are, at various stages of activity. Some inactive, some active. But yeah, there's we could do them. Winery Dogs, Sons of Apollo, Neil Morse Band, Transatlantic, Flying Colors, Metal Allegiance. I just played again with Twisted Sister, so I guess that's back on the list.
Mm-hmm.
I just did a tour with John Petrucci, so I guess you can count that as well. And Liquid Tension Experiment. So yeah, that's 9. And then I actually just did a session with another project. I guess that makes 10 various stages of activity and inactivity.
Yeah, very busy. You just did a Neil Peart tribute with Why Not? How did that come about? How did you get involved with that?
Well, one of the guys that organized that show is a guy named Michael Mossback, who was he was like head of security for Rush, and he was Neil Peart's writing partner for all those years. So he was one of Neil's closest people, and I've gotten to know Michael through the years as well through Neil.
Mm-hmm.
And when the idea of doing this came about, Michael hit me up immediately and told me what was going on, and this band Why Not was going to be the band playing, and then they would have all different various drummers sitting in with them. And actually, I'd seen Why Not in California with Michael and also Chris Stanke from Sabian. We went and saw them last year, and they were just phenomenal. I mean, what one of the best Rush tribute bands I'd ever seen. So anyway, when the idea of this Bubba Bash thing came around, he asked me if I would do it, and being it was coming from him, and he was one of Neil's closest people, I of course wanted to honor Neil and get involved, and so yeah, that's how it came about. And a few other people joined us, and it was a really great night. And those guys are tremendous. I mean, they nailed it. So it was a lot of focus on the drummers and us trying to pay tribute to Neil, but really so much credit needs to go to that band in being so great at playing all the Rush tunes.
Yeah,
and putting up with us drummers. Yeah.
When you've been, like we just talked about all the bands that you're in now, some of the bands that you've been in previously. When you get involved with a new project, like the Winery Dogs or whoever, is there a moment where you sit around and discuss, this is the kind of music we want to make, or is it the fact of jamming together creates the kind of music you want to make? How does that work?
No discussion, in all these cases, but let's talk about specifically the Winery Dogs. In the case of the Winery Dogs, even when we first got together, the very first time Billy, myself, and Richie sat down and played together, there was no discussion. Hey, let's do this or let's do that. We literally got behind our instruments and just started jamming, and this is what fell out of us. But I think inevitably, with the Winery Dogs, you're going to get that kind of bluesy, soulful, funky R&B vibe, because Richie, that's such a big part of what Richie does, and he as the guitar player and the singer, inevitably it's going to bring a big part to the sound. But Billy and I also are big fans of like the power trio sound and all the classic rock bands of the late 60s and early 70s, Vanilla Fudge and Grand Funk and the Who and Zeppelin. So Billy and I kind of bring that to the equation, and this just fell out of us, and I'm glad it did, because this was a style of music that I always loved. Like we mentioned at the start of the show, I grew up listening to those late 60s, early 70s bands, but I didn't really have an outlet for that with everything else I was doing. Everything else was either prog or metal. So when we got together to start the Winery Dogs, it was really refreshing for me to be tapping into this side of music, which I didn't really have in my arsenal, but it was a big part of my listening, styles. I listened to all kinds of music, but I hadn't really had a band creating this kind of music. So I was really happy that we kind of went in this direction.
Yeah. I have a question from one of my Patreon supporters. He also is a drummer and wants to know, when you're immersed in one of these 30-minute transatlantic epics or Neil Morse epics, how do you make sure you keep your place? I mean, is it just repetition, or in a composition that long, how do you keep track of where you're at?
I mean, it's just natural for me. It's I've been doing progressive technical music my whole career, and made a career for 25 years with Dream Theater playing pretty long songs, 10-minute songs, 15-minute, 20-minute songs. So I kind of was just very used to that format. So I don't really have to think about it. And then I started working with Neil, and Neil's the king of that. Neil and I think, have created, I don't know, 20 or 30 different songs that are all over the 20-minute mark. It's just, something that we both really are very comfortable and feel very natural with. But in answer to your question, how do I do it? How do I keep track? I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's just naturally something that works for me. I do have a great elephant's memory, and that's how I could go from band to band to band and have all this music stored up there, and could just play with Twisted Sister one night and the Winery Dogs the next night, and Neil Moore's band the next night. It's just embedded in my brain, and I kind of just I guess I'm lucky to have that ability. But yeah, I don't know, when you're creating these long songs, I mean, for a lot of people it might be a difficult thing, but for me it's always been very natural.
Okay. Fair enough. You mentioned Neil Morse. I got the opportunity to see the Neil Morse band on the Great Adventure when you were at this little place in Orlando called the Abbey, and nice little place. It was jam packed, and it made me wonder. You've played with Neil various incarnations, Flying Colors, Transatlantic, Neil Morse band, and Neil Morse solo on his records. What is it about your style, do you think, and Neil's that sort of just makes it such a good fit?
We really do have a great working chemistry and personal chemistry as well. I immediately gravitated towards Neil the first time I heard the very first Spock's Beard album, The Light. I heard it, before the rest of the world really knew it. I was like one of the first people to really be their cheerleader. And the first time I heard The Light, it just really spoke to me, his style of writing. I think mainly because he's so great at these prog epics. He could write these 30-minute epics, but at the same time, he has a great pop sensibility as well. And I love like the Beatles aspect. We're both Beatles fanatics. And I love the fact that, it was all intertwined, so you have the proggy stuff that's reminiscent of Genesis and Yes and Crimson, Pink Floyd, but then you also had this poppy side, like with, like stuff like the Beatles and Beach Boys and, Badfinger and all these kind of like classic pop 60s bands and sensibilities. So I love that he has both of those. It's something that just appeals to both of us. So we're just very much kindred spirits in terms of like that background and that musical, influence.
Yeah. Before I dive into the Winery Dogs questions, is there any chance of another Yellow Matter Custard at some time?
We'll probably do. I mean, we did the first round of shows in 2003. Then we regrouped and did another few shows in 2011. So I guess it's definitely time. I have so much fun with that. So yeah, that would be. In fact, there's my Yellow Matter Custard kit right there.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so the kit's sitting there waiting to be used again. But that would be fun. Maybe we'll see one of these days in the future. It would definitely be fun to revisit.
I love when you and Neil do Beatles trivia. That's it's always a
Yeah.
fun time. So the Winery Dogs, this is the third album, obviously, and it's this is the first album since 2015. Richie had made an announcement that the band was going to take a break, and was that just necessary to complete other projects? What was the break for?
I think the success of the first two albums and tours took everybody by surprise, and I think especially Richie. I don't know if Richie. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't want to speak on his behalf, but my perception of it is I think it became bigger and more demanding than he anticipated. So I think after two rounds of albums and tours that lasted 3 or 4 years and hundreds of shows, I think it was like, okay, let's just catch our breath and go and do the different things that we all do outside of the Winery Dogs. And I think we always knew we would come back together and regroup after a few years. I think it was just a matter of catching our breath, and I think that was a good idea because when you start doing album tour nonstop, it starts to get a little redundant. You start to lose your inspiration, and I think sometimes taking a step back, taking a few years off, really ignites the flame, and it kind of makes you miss it, and it makes it that much more special when you do come back together. I've found that with Transatlantic as well. That's why there was always so many years between albums with Transatlantic, and I think it worked for the Winery Dogs as well. Once we came back together to start this third album, it felt very fresh and inspired because it had been a few years since we had played and written together.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the writing process. How does a song become a Winery Dog song? How does a Winery Dog song start? Where does it start? Do you guys fly in parts to each other? Do you jam? How does it work?
It's got to be the three of us in a room, and all three albums, it was at Richie's house at his studios. First two albums was his older house, and then this latest album was in the newer house that he's been in for a few years now. But in any case, it starts with the three of us in a room, just literally whatever comes out, whether it be a guitar part, a bass part, a drum beat, somebody will throw something on the floor, and then we all react to it. We all join in, we all add to it, we make suggestions, try taking it in different places, and all three of us are really open to each other's direction or ideas. I think there's a lot of mutual respect and trust between the three of us. So we just start jamming and piecing it together and arranging the parts, verse, chorus, bridge, solo, and usually within a few hours, we'll have the blueprint and arrangement for the music. And in the case of this third album, once that was done, we'd hit record and get my drums tracked right there and then while it was completely fresh. Mm-hmm. And, in the case of this album, once we had 10 or 11, drum tracks and song arrangements, it's like, okay. And we all went our separate ways. And then Richie would start working on lyrics and vocal melodies and vocals and, working on that process, which it took several months for him to, get all that together in a place where he's happy with it. Once that's done, he'll send the vocals to me and Billy, and we'll add our harmonies and backup vocals, and I'll add percussion. And that's the process. The writing of the blueprints. Sometimes, these 10 songs were probably put together within a few weeks of each other, but the whole process took about a year or so by the time everything's written and then mixed and mastered and all that stuff. Yeah.
Where did it start? What was the first one you worked on for this record?
The first thing we jammed on, I think, was Pharaoh, if I'm correct. That might have been the very, very first riff that was put on the floor, and we jammed on and got the music together. I could be wrong. I mean, I have it right here on my iTunes if I looked. But the first one, that Richie laid vocals to was Xanadu, which that was the fourth piece of music we were working on. But it was the first one that, like, at the end of the night, Richie went up to his studio after we had left and he started working on vocals and melodies. And then the next day he showed it to me and Billy. And that was the first one that really jumped out with vocals this time around. And as soon as we heard it with vocals, we knew it was really a winner, and knew that it would probably be one of the first singles, and it ended up being.
Yeah. Well, it's important that people hear these songs, because if you just look at the track list, your first single is Xanadu. Your second is Mad World. If you're not careful, you're thinking Rush and you're thinking Tears for Fears.
I know, yeah.
But yeah, these are all completely original compositions. Do you have a favorite track on this record, Mike? One that's more fun to play than the others?
I like them all for different reasons. You know, I like, stuff like Xanadu and Gaslight is more shreddy and more upbeat, more energetic. Rise is like that as well. But I also like, the more improv jamming songs, like the back end of Pharaoh has this really cool jam, and the middle section of Stars has a pretty cool jam, and the ending of the Red Wine has a jam. And in those cases, we were just kind of improvising and literally jamming. And what you're hearing in the final thing was just us going for it in the moment. But I can't really pick a favorite song. They're I would say that about any album I make with any band. They all mean a lot to you. So and they all kind of provide different emotions. Sometimes I like the heavy stuff, sometimes I like the mellow stuff. Sometimes I like the epics, sometimes I like the shorter, concise songs. So, it's the cliche to say, but they're all like your children. You really can't really pick one,
Yeah. So it's Richie Kotzen on guitar, keyboards, piano, lead vocals, Billy Sheehan on bass and backing vocals, and yourself on drums, percussion, and backing vocals. And it's a trio. It is a power trio. There's some power here. It's bluesy, but you guys being who you are, especially you and Billy, it's not quite that simple. There's always these little intricate complexities in the music. How would you describe Winery Dogs music to somebody who's familiar with the rest of your catalog, but maybe isn't as familiar with the Winery Dogs?
Well, it's all about the song. I think of any band I'm a part of, I think this band probably has the most quote unquote accessible songs. They're shorter than most of the other bands I'm a part of. They're more concise. There's sort of songs that you could literally sit around a campfire with an acoustic guitar and play any of these songs. So that's the first and foremost focus, is having something that has hooks and memorable parts and melodies. Richie brings so much to the table in that department. But then on top of it, the icing on the cake is the musicianship that's in there. And obviously Billy and myself, we try to lay it down and be the foundation as for all these songs, but at the same time, we want the playing to always be interesting. It sounds like us. It doesn't sound, even though the songs may be simple, the playing, there's a lot of personality in there, and you could tell it's me and it's Billy and it's Richie, when it comes to the musicianship. So that's the thing. It's strong songs and hooks sprinkled with great musicianship. Not to pat ourselves on the back, but we've all been doing this a while, and we know how to play our instruments and keep it interesting for the listener.
You guys have the tour coming up, starting in February 15th, I believe. Do you know how many dates and countries you're doing here?
It's still growing. Even today, I just announced a few more shows down in South America. So yeah, the calendar just keeps expanding and expanding. We're starting with a U.S. leg, which will go for almost 2 months, and we don't even make it to the West Coast. That's how extended it is. We're playing a lot of places in America I've never even played before, and then we're going to go down to South America for shows down there in April and May. Then come back up, and in May we're going to do some more U.S. shows, which haven't been announced yet, but that'll get us to the West Coast. Then we have Europe in June. And there's a lot more stuff later in the year that's already on the books, but we haven't announced yet. So that'll be coming soon. But we're going to have a more extended European run later in the year, as well as Japan and Asia and stuff like that. So yeah, it's starting in February, and I have stuff on the calendar all the way through Thanksgiving with the band that we just haven't announced yet. But all that stuff will be coming soon.
Wow. All right. Well, to find out more about this, you can go to www.thewinerydogs.com. Check out the Winery Dogs Facebook. They're on Instagram and Twitter at the Winery Dogs. Mike, what's next for you after the Winery Dogs, or have you even thought that far in advance?
I'm not thinking that far in advance. We're all really focused on this, but I mean, there are things. For instance, in a few weeks, the live transatlantic package from the last show we did in Paris, that's about to drop. And then there's also an appearance with Flying Colors on Cruise to the Edge next April 2024. So I guess that's the next thing on the calendar after Winery Dogs, as far as I can see at the moment. But who the hell knows what'll develop between now and then.
Yeah. Well, and Neil's always busy too. So
and actually, Neil and I have Morse Fests in August. We're going to do a weekend in America and then a weekend in Europe as well. That'll be in August. In the midst of all the Winery Dog stuff, these are just like two one-off appearances that I'm doing with Neil this year.
Oh, very cool. Taking the Morse Fest experience to Europe would be pretty cool.
Yeah, for the first time. That'll be fun.
So the album is called 3 by the Winery Dogs, released February 3rd. So it's brand new. Go pick it up. Go see the Winery Dogs on tour. I'm planning to go to the Orlando show and buy merchandise and support the band. Mike Portnoy from many bands: Transatlantic, Flying Colors, Sons of Apollo, Neil Morse Band, Liquid Tension Experiment, formerly Dream Theater, Adrenaline Mob. Man, so many bands, so many really great bands. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you spending some time telling me a little bit about your background and about this new Winery Dogs album.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.